Hello, everyone. If we haven't met, my name is Tom Darnell. I'm one of the pastors here at Covenant. And as you may know, that each Tuesday and Thursday we're releasing a devotional video series that's based on the prayer guide that you can find on our website. So for today, for Thursday, I've chosen Psalm 132 that you'll find in the daily prayer guide. And I'm going to just share a few thoughts on that psalm. This Psalm 132 is one of the 15 Psalms of Ascent, and these Psalms were sung by the Jews on the way to Jerusalem during the three required religious festivals that made their presence in Jerusalem necessary. So as they made their pilgrimage, these songs were sung. So here in Psalm 132, we see that the main theme is the theme of God's dwelling place. So let's look at a few thoughts about God's dwelling place that's spoken of here in this psalm. First of all, we see that David promises a place for God. Listen to verse 4 and 5. It says, "I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob." So specifically, we learn here in verse 8 that David is seeking a dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant. We need to remember that at this time that the temple had not yet been built, that they were still worshiping using the portable tabernacle as a place for worship that began under Moses. So we want to understand that here that David is seeking for a place for the Ark that is a symbol of God's dwelling among the people. So we understand that this ark was not yet in Jerusalem. In fact, the last 20 years, it had been a place called Jahar, which we see here, which is an abbreviation for a longer place that's found in verse 6 here in this psalm. You might remember that the Ark of the Covenant was a wooden box. It was about 3 feet long. It was about 1.5 feet deep and 1.5 feet wide. That was probably the most important article that was in the temple that was used for worship, first of all in the tabernacle, then the temple. And it was placed in the most holy place of all of the tabernacle and later the temple, which was called the Holy of Holies. And into this space, before the Ark of the Covenant, the great high priest would only go once a year on the Day of Atonement, which we know in our culture today as Yom Kippur. The top of this ark was solid gold, and it was called the mercy seat, which is where the great high priest in the Day of Atonement would sprinkle blood for the remission of the people's sins. And then inside this ark was placed the golden urn that had a sampling of the manna that God supplied in the wilderness. It also had the budding staff of Aaron, and then the tables of the covenant, or the Ten Commandments. So nothing else in the Ark of the Covenant, nothing else in the temple, other than the Ark of the Covenant, represented God more than this did. That this was the expression of where God dwelt. Of course, God didn't dwell in a box, but it did express and signify his dwelling with his people. So David here vows to bring this ark from Jahar to Jerusalem, because God had chosen Jerusalem as a city where the ark should be placed within the tabernacle, and then later the temple built by David's son Solomon. So is there any application to us today of David's promise to God of a dwelling place for him? So it is God, we want to understand, first of all, not us, as an application that determines how and where he is to be worshipped. We don't determine how and where God is worshipped. He does. So it was God, not David, that designed and ordered the building of the tabernacle. It was God and not David that ordered where his tabernacle was to be built, that is to say in Jerusalem. And it was God, not David, that designed how he was to be worshipped in the temple. But having said that, it was David just as it should be for us, who had to avail himself of all the means that God had given him to worship him and to know him and to experience him. Listen to what David writes in Psalm 63. He says this, "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you." So David availed himself of the ways that God had given him to worship him. It was David who earnestly sought him. It was his soul that thirsted for him, that he looked for him in the sanctuary. And so that applies to us as well, that all the means that God has given us to worship him, we must avail ourselves of if we are going to experience the worship of God just as they did in the time of David. Then secondly, we see that not only does David promise a dwelling place for God, but that God promises a permanent dwelling place for himself. Listen to verses 11, 13, and 17 in this psalm. "The Lord swore to David a sure oath from which he will not turn back. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne. For the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for the dwelling place, that I will make a horn to sprout for David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed." So this promise that God makes to David of where he will dwell finds its ultimate fulfillment not in a geographical but in a spiritual city. So Zion, the place where God will dwell, is not in reference here of a geographical city, but it's in reference to a spiritual people. Zion is his church where he dwells. And so what makes this transformation possible of God's dwelling being first of all in a temporary tabernacle and then moving to be with his new Jerusalem, with his church? That is only possible through Jesus Christ coming in the flesh to dwell among us. Many years ago, there was a popular story that was turned into a play and then in a movie that was called My Pal Gus. And this play was about a man whose wife had left him to raise her little boy all alone. And he was extremely successful, a very wealthy executive. And the whole plot of this play centered around the tension between the business this man had and his own son. In one scene, the private school that his son attended, there was to be given, each parent was to give of their time 1 day a week at the school to help. So they were supposed to do this for a whole month. And so they were to help at playtime or to be with their children, but they had to give 1 day a week for a month. But this man, instead of going because of his busyness, did not go. And instead, he sent a whole array of playground equipment instead of going himself to the school. So when he came to work one day, the next day after he had given this playground equipment, all in his office was the playground equipment that was placed there. And then attached to this playground equipment was a note from a very wise teacher, which said this: "As a gift, this is far too much, but as a substitute for you, it is far too little." Well, the triune God did not send playground equipment as a substitute of their love for a fallen and lost humanity, but they sent in the flesh Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, as a fulfillment of the promise we read here in Psalm 132, that we might be saved from eternal death and that we might be set apart for his eternal dwelling. So we understand this coming Sunday being Palm Sunday, that when the King Jesus came into Jerusalem to take David's throne, that he doesn't come boldly riding a steed. He comes humbly riding on a donkey in preparation to humble himself to death on a cross, that he might make us his eternal dwelling place by his Spirit. So how does this apply to us? Is there any application for us concerning God's promise of a dwelling place for himself? Well, there's an already and not yet dimension to that application. What is the already dimension of applying this to our lives? Listen to what we read in Hebrews 6, and we'll see this application. Here's what it says: It says, we have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner in our behalf. So it tells us that Jesus has gone into that Holy of Holies. He has spilled his blood on the mercy seat himself. And then we are told here that we can do the very same thing, not spilling our blood, but have access to the very dwelling of God. We can go into the most holy place that Jesus has prepared for us, that we might experience his fellowship. So 2 things about that. First of all, we should listen to him in that dwelling place, that he might feed our soul. So we come expectantly to listen to God, to us through his word. So we come to his word and we listen to him. We need to be careful as we come to the word that we don't read a book, but that we listen to a voice, that he might feed our soul. In that most holy place before his word, our souls can be fed. But secondly, we're to lift our voice to him, that we might receive mercy and find grace. We're told that in Hebrews 4, that when we pray, that when we bring our praise and when we bring our intercession, that God says we will find mercy and will receive his grace there in that holy place. That should be our practice as well. We listen to him, we lift our voice to him in that holy of all holies, that we might know the fellowship of our great God. But there's also a not yet dimension in applying this to our lives. God's dwelling among us through Christ by his Spirit is a reality now, but his ultimate reality awaits us all. Listen to the not yet that we look forward to. This is in Revelation 21. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be no more mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And he is seated on the throne and said, behold, I am making all things new. So during this time of the coronavirus, we understand our own frailty like we never have in recent history. But this gives us an understanding that the not yet is going to be fulfilled for us. That there'll come that day that we'll be in the actual presence of God. There'll be no more tears. There'll be no more mourning. There'll be no more death. And that God's presence will feed our soul and will pour out mercy and grace upon us as we've never experienced before. May God bless us all as we seek him and the dwelling places he's provided for us.